Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into a philosophical seminar on a massive, almost invisible shift in human history. We're talking about the profound transition from 19th century military colonialism, where power was asserted through sheer physical force and occupation, to modern technological hegemony, where control is exercised completely under the radar through data and algorithms.
So it really begs the fundamental question, are we actually living in a post-colonial world, or has the empire just gotten incredibly good at hiding? As we unpack this in our digital age, you'll see how historical patterns of resource exploitation and domination deeply mirror our current reliance on global AI and data outsourcing. It's essentially a question about freedom and power today.
Here's our roadmap for the seminar. We'll start with the historical blueprint, look at the appropriation of knowledge, and then explore the digital plantation and cloud empires. Then we'll synthesize all of this through Heidegger's concept of the standing reserve and wrap up with the resulting crisis of meaning. All right, Section 1, the historical blueprint. Let's look back to set up our main thesis.
If you trace this timeline, the evolution is pretty striking. You've got Napoleon rolling into Egypt in 1798, the British occupation in 1882, and that whole Victorian era focused on violently extracting raw materials like cotton, rubber, and minerals. What's absolutely crucial to understand here is that this exact same blueprint, extracting raw materials from the periphery to enrich the imperial center, is still fully operational today. Except in the 2020s, the raw material isn't rubber, it's our data, and it's fueling global AI pipelines.
Moving right along to Section 2, appropriating knowledge, because it wasn't just about grabbing physical stuff.
You know, the cultural critic Edward Said really hit the nail on the head here. He argued that Orientalism was way more than just some Western fantasy about the East. It was a deeply effective intellectual tool of hegemony. The European colonial project relied heavily on epistemic violence. By that, I mean the active, intentional erasure of local ways of thinking. They suppressed indigenous knowledge systems, replaced them with Eurocentric views, and justified their intervention by portraying the other as irrational.
And there's this massive historical irony here. The Western Industrial Revolution absolutely skyrocketed, right? But it heavily benefited from translating and absorbing incredibly advanced Arab and Islamic achievements in medicine, astronomy, chemistry, and optics. Those appropriated sciences were literally used to manufacture the technological and military superiority needed to subjugate the very regions they originated from.
Which brings us to Section 3, the digital plantation. Let's look at our antithesis and how this all connects to our current digital reality.
I want you to notice how perfectly and honestly how unsettlingly these two eras mirror each other. Back in the day, you had the brutal extraction of blood minerals from places like the Democratic Republic of Congo to fuel the Industrial Revolution. Today, that identical extractive logic is alive and well. It just looks like algorithmic data monopolization and a massive reliance on hidden digital labor.
And that brings us to the stark reality of what's known as ghost work. Look, we tend to think of AI as this purely magical, autonomous math, right? But the reality is it requires an army of human beings to manually label, categorize, and moderate those datasets. This labor is heavily outsourced to the global south, where people act as the invisible, highly underpaid backbone of modern AI production.
It's essentially tech giants replicating old colonial labor hierarchies step by step. Whole communities in the global majority are being treated like mere petri dishes for AI testing. The work gets shipped off to places like Kenya, India, and the Philippines. You've got content moderators paid absolute pennies to filter out incredibly graphic, traumatic content. They absorb this huge psychological toll with zero support, entirely just to ensure that the AI models are clean and safe for Western consumers. It's literally extraction all the way down.
Okay, Section 4, cloud empires. Because if data is the new raw material, we have to ask, who owns the infrastructure?
Well, the answer is just a tiny handful of multinational corporations, mostly sitting comfortably in the global north, completely dominating our global digital infrastructure. This monopolization of cloud computing creates a kind of borderless power. It effectively bypasses local sovereignty, forcing a universal, standardized consumption pattern onto developing nations, which slowly erodes their local cultural identities.
Think about it like this. Historical empires controlled global trade routes and deep water ports to maintain their grip, right? Well, today's data processing infrastructures dictate digital sovereignty in the exact same way. Through undersea cables, foreign data extraction is put on overdrive.
A lack of regional data centers forces the global south to rely on Western servers. It completely entrenches global inequality, turning local populations into passive data providers rather than actual empowered digital citizens.
Now for Section 5, Heidegger's standing reserve. Let's synthesize this philosophically.
To really grasp the depth of this, we turn to the philosopher Martin Heidegger and his concept of the standing reserve, or Bestand in German. He was warning us decades ago that modern technology isn't just some neutral tool we pick up and put down. It's actually a pervasive way of viewing the world that reduces absolutely everything in nature, including us humans, into mere consumable resources just sitting there awaiting extraction.
I really want you to think deeply about what that means for us today. When AI systems are constantly scraping our social interactions, our browsing history, our very biometrics, they are fundamentally altering our existence. They reduce our lives, our behaviors, and our relationships into raw, quantifiable data to feed algorithmic decision-making. We literally become the standing reserve.
And this constant, coercive extraction creates a massive existential void. Because when humans are reduced to just functional, predictable little entities, literally just data nodes waiting to be analyzed and monetized, we risk losing our souls, for lack of a better term. We start living in a world defined entirely by quantifiable objects and cold machine logic, completely stripping away profound, unquantifiable human meaning.
Which leads us to our final part, Section 6, the crisis of meaning. What happens to a society running on this logic? If we look through the philosophical lenses of Michel Foucault and Max Weber, the picture gets pretty clear. Weber warned us about rational domination, this idea that society would just suffocate under strict, cold bureaucratic efficiency. And Foucault brilliantly showed how knowledge is weaponized to discipline us. Today, massive algorithmic sorting rigidly enforces these new digital class structures, completely reshaping how we behave individually.
Just look at the existential toll this takes in highly automated societies. Classical ideas about identity and human freedom, they start to contract. Our agency and moral autonomy get chipped away, replaced by predictive algorithms that are perfectly happy to dictate our preferences, what we buy, what we read, even how we vote. This disruption of traditional communal support systems, swapping them out for subjugation to machine-generated choices, it causes a profound crisis of moral meaning. It reminds me of philosopher Nick Bostrom's warning. He points out that if we push for pure technological progress without hardwiring human values into it, we are risking catastrophic consequences. He uses this famous thought experiment of an AI blindly maximizing production, like just making paperclips forever, until it consumes every resource on Earth and destroys humanity. If our AI systems are built on colonial logic and endless extraction instead of human wisdom, we are speeding toward a very similar, mechanized fate. So, to wrap up our seminar today, this transition from military to algorithmic hegemony is very real. The way the global south is exploited for data and AI labor perfectly mirrors those old Victorian extraction methods. And because of that, we have to critically evaluate these digital structures. We must ensure that technology is liberated to harmonize with our spiritual depth and our human dignity, rather than just acting as a new colonial logic building an empty, automated world. I'm going to leave you with this final thought to chew on as you keep critiquing the algorithms that are shaping our history and our future. Will we demand a digital world that actually empowers our shared humanity? Or are we just going to accept our fate as passive data, sitting around in the invisible empire's standing reserve? Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.